Thank you very much for having me here at TEDxBKK, and thank you very much to the organisers of TEDxBKK for putting in such a fantastic effort in getting this event up and running at such a wonderful venue. So if we give them all a big round of applause, we really appreciate their fantastic work. This story begins in my presentation in 1898. Delegates from all over the world were gathering in New York for the world's first international town planning conference. There was one item that dominated their agenda. It wasn't housing, disease, sanitation, or infrastructure. The delegates were driven to desperation by horse manure. Now, don't get me wrong, horses are very lovely and beautiful, graceful animals, but every day a horse produces between 7 and 15 kilograms of horse manure. And when you multiply that by the 150,000 horses hitting the streets of New York every day, you end up with around 2 million kilograms of horse manure hitting the streets every single day. And this is not to mention the 180,000 litres of horse urine hitting the streets as well. So this was a pretty major problem for New York to face. One expert study at the time predicted that by 1930, horse manure would rise to Manhattan's third-story windows. They predict that with full seriousness and authority. So town planners from all over the world were gathered in New York to address one of the major problems for urban cities to confront in the 20th century. And they convened the conference after 3 days of the allotted 10, and they concluded that this was an impossible problem to solve. There was no solution in sight to the problem of horse manure in urban cities. Well, the town planners could never have predicted it, but within only 5 years, in 1903, Henry Ford founded the Ford Motor Company. And by 1908, he'd produced the Model T automobile. By 1912, cars outnumbered horses on the streets of New York. By 1917, New York's last horse-drawn streetcar did its final run. It's because of visionaries like Henry Ford that the future is so difficult to predict. It makes it so difficult to predict and plan and come up with solutions to these problems in an organised way. And I think we can look back in history to many examples of visionaries that have changed the world with their visions. Henry Ford, for example, was absolutely steadfast and committed to his vision of changing the world by providing an automobile for the great majority. He was also committed to the vision of paying his employees at high enough salaries so they could each purchase a car as well. And I think we can look back to wonderful examples of visionaries like titans of industry, Henry Ford, Andrew Carnegie, but also peace activists like Mahatma Gandhi that transformed the social relations of society, certainly for the better. What I think we need to remember is that these visionaries cannot change the world on their own. What they're always able to do is inspire large groups of people, often through vehicles of change like organisations and social movements, and they're able to harness their creative energies and direct them towards realising the vision of change together. And what they're able to do is inspire something deep within us, which I think is an urge to create. I remember reading a few years ago a book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning, which I think really speaks to this urge that we've all got to create deep inside. Viktor Frankl was an Austrian neurologist and psychiatrist. He ended up becoming one of the 20th century's leading figures in psychoanalytic philosophy. Viktor Frankl wrote this book, Man's Search for Meaning, after being freed from concentration camps in the Second World War. This book, in a lot of influential surveys, is often referred to as one of the most influential books of the 20th century in America. It sold over 10 million copies. It was translated into 24 languages. It's by far and away the most inspiring book I've ever read in my life. And I remember reading this book, and there was a passage within it where Viktor Frankl talks about having a very bad leg injury, and he's in a lot of pain from his leg injury. He was forced to limp for many kilometres in very cold and bitter winds. And while he was limping along, he became completely consumed with the miserable state of affairs of his existence as a prisoner in the concentration camp. He started asking himself a number of questions, like, what will there be to eat when he arrived at the prison camp? Will he be subjected once again to violence by one of the prison guards? How's he going to trade cigarettes for the shoelaces that he so desperately needed for his shoes? And he became completely consumed by this state of existence. So what he forced himself to do while he was limping along on this journey was to visualize a state of affairs that he would create. He started thinking about the life he would create for himself when he was freed from the concentration camp. In the case of Viktor Frankl, he started picturing giving lectures at universities around the world to put forth his new theory of psychology. Viktor Frankl's key insight in this book is that the prisoners that lost faith in their future were doomed to moral and spiritual decay. And his theory is that the primary drive in life is the pursuit and discovery of meaning and purpose. And we get this when we think of the future we're going to create from ourselves and reflect back into the present moment. There's a wonderful quote in the book that I think really speaks to this theory that Viktor Frankl has. It does not really matter what we expect from life, but rather what life expects from us. This often makes me think of a wonderful entrepreneur called Sheetal Walsh, who is the founder of Shanti Microfinance. She's also a very good friend of mine. And Sheetal used to be an investment banker. So she's worked with people from all parts of the ecosystem of entrepreneurship, from rickshaw drivers in the slums of Gujarat to institutional investors in the tech heartland of Silicon Valley. She's got an amazing experience, all kinds of entrepreneurs she's worked with before. And she's got a wonderful insight. She says that she finds the most inspiring entrepreneurs are slum entrepreneurs because they're always very committed to their visions of change, which involve not just creating their businesses, but also of lifting their local communities out of poverty and raising living standards in these communities. And what Sheetal says is that the most inspiring and successful entrepreneurs in developed economies create their businesses with similar socially conscious ends in mind. And then once these entrepreneurs create these businesses, the next step is always to inspire big groups of people to help achieve this vision of change together. I think deep down, when we think about this a bit further, we can see that we're all slum entrepreneurs at heart. We all want to create positive change in our own lives, but not just for ourselves. We want to create positive change in the lives of people around us. So I'd like to ask the audience a question here as we start to think a little more about this vision of change. And I think when we're working towards this vision of change, that's when we're working towards a broader purpose and meaning. Can you raise your hand if you work full-time for an organization? Okay, so the majority of people here work full-time for an organization. Can you keep your hand raised if you believe that you understand the broader vision or purpose of the organization you work for? Okay, we've got a few less hands raised. Now, can you keep your hand raised if you feel that you're passionate about what you're doing for this organization? We are at a TEDx conference, so there are a few inspired people here, but the numbers have dropped a little bit. I think that when we understand the why of what we do, the broader purpose and meaning of our actions in our work, that's when we really become very passionate in what we do. And it's when we're passionate in what we do that we unlock our creative energies and we start directing these towards the vision of change. And that's when we make the most difference in our own lives and the lives of people around us. There's a wonderful story from 1977 about a guy called Rob Campbell, who's now the CEO of a technology company in California. Back in 1977, Rob Campbell was a young programmer, and he was extremely passionate about the potential of personal computers. And he really wanted to work for a company that was at the forefront of the personal computing revolution. So he first went to visit Tandy Computers, and he was interviewed by some executives at Tandy, and he asked the executives, "What's your vision for the personal computer?" Well, the Tandy executives were super excited, and they said, "We think the personal computer can be the next big thing on everyone's holiday wish list." So Campbell wasn't really too inspired by this, so he next went to Commodore, which is one of the companies that introduced the personal computer in 1977. Commodore's stock at the time was trading at less than $1 a share. And Campbell asked the Commodore executives, "What's your vision for the personal computer?" And the Commodore executives, again very excited, said, "We think it can help our stock price raise to above $2 a share." And again, Campbell wasn't particularly inspired by this. So he decided to take Steve Jobs up on an offer to meet for lunch. So he met Steve Jobs for lunch, and he asked Steve Jobs at the beginning of the lunch, "Steve, what's your vision for the personal computer?" And Campbell says now that what happened next still gives him goosebumps whenever he thinks about it. He said that Steve Jobs was a magical storyteller. he started speaking about how personal computers would change everything from the way we entertained ourselves, the way we worked, to the way we educated our children. Campbell said that you just couldn't help but buy into that energy of the vision and want to help Steve Jobs and Apple Computers realize this change. It's this broader search for purpose and meaning that led to the creation of Unexus, which is a digital media platform. Over the last few years, I've been doing some doctoral research in international political economy, looking at governance structures in international finance. And over the last few years, I found myself increasingly drawn to the potential of digital technology and harnessing this potential to change the world. And I kept on trying to do the doctoral research and working towards this, but I kept on being pulled back towards this digital revolution that we're all part of today. So I've ended up leaving the PhD without finishing it, and I'm working with a wonderful team on Unexus, and it's the most inspiring thing I've ever done because we're all totally committed to this vision of change. We're working so well together, and it's being realized. And what we've done is we've created a web platform that helps people and organizations connect with each other based on purpose and meaning, based on the world that we want to create together. So I found this incredibly inspiring. And I think we live in a really unique time in history where we can harness the potential of digital technology to change the world for the better, to create new models of change. I mean, already within only 15 years, Google has gone ahead and started to organize the world's information, and they're creating what they refer to as an artificial brain. Within only 8 years, Facebook is working towards its vision of making the world more open and connected. And when you look at this graph, you can see that they have connected nearly 1 billion people around the world, connecting people across boundaries and countries. It's a truly inspiring graph, I think, to see this. But as Jeff Bezos recently said, and Jeff Bezos is the CEO and founder of Amazon, we're at only day one of the internet. So this is only the beginning. The potential to harness the power of the digital revolution and create new models of change is absolutely enormous. As we're speaking about here at TEDxBKK, there's a number of threats to global peace and security that have intensified since the turn of the 21st century. And in particular, we're looking at climate change, financial crisis, nuclear proliferation, and global health epidemics. Extremely challenging problems that lie before us. And I think that we need to all start thinking a lot more about the broader meaning and purpose of what we do. We need to start thinking about the vision of change that we'd like to work towards, and then we need to start connecting with people and organizations around us that share a similar vision of change. It's because when we make these connections and we start working with like-minded people, that real forward momentum is created. And that's when we really unleash our creative energies and we start to realize these visions of change together. It is a unique time in human history. I think we can look to companies like Facebook and Google and many other tech companies and see how they're changing the world. And I do think we can start to utilize the potential of digital technology and form connections like this based on meaning and purpose and based on solving some of the world's toughest challenges to address. Because these challenges that we've just identified are equally as insurmountable as the problems of horse manure in the late 19th century. So we need to start working together in creating a better future. Let me close with a quote by Goethe. Whatever you do or dream you can do, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. Thank you. Cheers.